glad to be here this morning, and we're going to look at the very end of Matthew chapter 17 and look at the conversation that Jesus has with Peter, and a very interesting way in which he provides some money that was needed to pay a temple tax. There in Matthew chapter 17, beginning in verse 24, we'll start reading. It says, "When they came to Capernaum, those who collected the 2 drachma tax came to Peter and said, 'Does your teacher not pay the 2 drachma tax?' He said, 'Yes.' And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, 'What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect customs or poll tax? From their sons or from strangers?' When Peter said, 'From strangers,' Jesus said to him, 'Then the sons are exempt. However, so that we do not offend them, go to the sea and throw in a hook and take the first fish that comes up. And when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for you and me.'" I think if any of you may be having last-minute gift ideas, if you think about giving a gift to a Christian, this would be a great gift for a Christian, a fish coin purse, maybe a reference to this passage. Anytime you take that coin out, just remember that coin that Jesus caused come out of a fish's mouth. I've always been so baffled by this particular lesson or example of Jesus' power. I almost get to a point that I wonder if, is he just showing off here? It's almost like he just shows he can do anything, obviously. But nonetheless, there is really a reason for why he does it this way. But I've always just been so amazed that there really is no end to what Jesus is capable of. And really suppose that really is the first thing that we get from this. That there really is no limit. Even in the mundane specifics of our lives, there's no limit to what Jesus is capable of doing. And for me, I think that's a great lesson that sometimes I miss. It's interesting, we talk about the great big things that God does. He can take down giants. He can destroy huge, massive armies with just a few people. He can cause the dead to rise. He can cause the blind to see. And we recognize that and we see that, but maybe sometimes in our own lives, or maybe it's not something big we need. Maybe it's not asking for sight that we really are asking for. We're not asking for life after death. Maybe it's just paying a temple tax, paying a bill, getting through the day without the need to worry or have fear. Isn't it interesting that Jesus seems to always have an answer? Jesus always seems to have a way, almost as if to demonstrate and teach you and I to really take stock in what he says about not worrying. One of the great blessings of being a child of God, he says, "Come unto me and you will find comfort. You will find rest for your souls." And again, he tries to demonstrate why we could really take him up on that, why we should believe in that. Because he shows in the mundane things of life, he knows every little detail. And he's taken so many of our issues, our thoughts into account. And that's the first point I want to bring up, is that Jesus knows your thoughts. He knows every single thought. In fact, to such an extent that Jesus lets us understand even to the number of the hairs of our head. That's the extent of how deep he knows everything. But that's the one thing that I get from this passage is there's something interesting that happens. And we see Peter's typical character. And I love some of the things that Peter reveals about himself, because I think sometimes I find myself in that, maybe so quick to speak, not maybe so quick to listen or be patient, maybe quick to act. And Peter does that again here. Peter finds himself in a very sticky situation. He senses that there are some people questioning the motives and questioning the actions of his Lord. And of course, Peter always willing to defend Jesus. Remember, Peter always wanting to defend his Lord. And he speaks very quickly here. He senses they are maybe perhaps looking for something again to accuse Jesus of. And of course, They believe they have a great question. Well, I got a question about your teacher. We don't have a record of him paying the poll tax. Does he pay it? Is he going to pay it? And Peter goes, yes, absolutely, yes, he pays the poll tax. And Peter says he hurries to the house. It says he came into the house and Jesus says spoke to him first. The language of Matthew here is actually, it means to prevent or to proceed or stop short or keep him from proceeding with what he was going to say. And Jesus goes and speaks first. And what Jesus shows here is that Jesus sympathizes and recognizes and understands that Peter is in a dilemma. He has just spoken and said, yes, my teacher pays the poll tax. But maybe he should have checked with Jesus before he spoke that. And he's no doubt going to Jesus and about to tell him about this situation, to tell him about maybe the situation. Did I answer that correctly? Are we going to pay the poll tax? And Jesus stops him and says, let me rest your anxious thoughts and let me know I already know. I already know what you're thinking. So let me ask you a question. Let me help you find the answer. No doubt it's kind of troubled you. They were coming, looking for someone to accuse me. You and your desire to defend me wanted to speak up for my behalf and say, no, of course I'm going to pay the poll tax. But maybe you're questioning and wondering, is that even correct? So let me ask you, Peter. He says, let me ask you a question. What do you think, Simon? I love what Jesus says, what do you think? He's not asking him to tell him. He's saying, I already know what you're thinking. And the question Jesus gives is to indicate Jesus knows exactly everything that's in Peter's mind. He knows the things he's afraid of. He knows the things he's worried about. He knows the things that he wishes he could do. He knows the things he's attempting to do. He knows he has a great zeal and a desire to please the Lord. And he also knows how many times he maybe questions within himself. Is he capable? And all those things. In fact, Jesus knows so much about Peter. We're going to later find out Jesus knew that Peter, even though he would boast and brag about how much he would defend the Lord, Jesus knew that was just talk. Jesus knew that was the way when somebody wishes they were bigger than they are, how sometimes we are afraid that maybe we'll be exposed, right? And we start speaking ourselves up. Jesus knew that. He said, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows twice. He knows. He already knows it. And that was one instance, remember, where Peter was trying to maybe boast a little bit, try to prevent anybody from knowing a little bit of his inner darkest secrets, that if he were pressured enough, he might give it. And this is, again, one of those examples. Peter has a long history of when pressure is put on him, he instantaneously sometimes acts accordingly. He does it in later. Remember, Paul has to address it. He says, how come that when the Jews from the circumcision party came, all of a sudden you changed sides? Peter, didn't you just preach that the Gentiles don't have to be circumcised? Peter has this way about him. And before he can come and say anything to Jesus about it, before he can explain the situation, Jesus already knows about it. And I think we should take great comfort in that. But all throughout, there's plenty of other scriptures that indicate that this is the case. He says, what do you think, Simon? And indicating Jesus already knows. In John chapter 2, verses 24 through 25 says, but Jesus on his part was not entrusting himself to them. He knew all men, and because he did not need anyone to testify concerning man, he himself knew what was in man. In Matthew chapter 12 and verse 25, he says, and knowing their thoughts, Jesus said to them, he already knew what his enemies were planning to do. Over in Psalm 139, it's a very beautiful psalm indicating the extent of what Jesus knows and what God knows about us. Turn to Psalm 139. Psalm 139 verse 1 says, O Lord, you have searched me and known me, and you know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand my thought from afar. You scrutinize my path and my lying down, and are intimately acquainted with all my ways. Notice verse 4. He says, even before there is a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. Now, I'll admit, there's almost a little bit kind of scary sometimes you think about that. Well, you know, even before I even formed the word, already what I'm thinking. But throughout this psalm, he wants us to take great comfort. This is not an attribute of the Lord to be frightened by. You know, some people can take that attribute of God. He knows everything. He sees what's in your heart. He knows what's there. You can't deceive the Lord. That's true. But sometimes we can be sometimes used as a scare tactic, and it's not supposed to be used that way. In fact, if anything, it's supposed to be an invitation for us to let our guard down, humble ourselves, and see if God already knows everything, he must have answers as well. If God already knows the questions I have, even the questions that maybe I don't even want other people to know about myself, am I capable? Sometimes men struggle with that. Men want people to think they're capable. I don't know many men that would be honest and say, I doubt myself. Men have doubts. Fathers have doubts. Mothers have doubts. People in strong, bold positions of authority have doubts, have fears. God knows all about that. But notice how the psalmist turns that into, that's a wonderful invitation. If he knows, if he has such intricate detail, he must also have intricate plans and solutions that help us find the answers to often these things that we are wandering in the dark about and unknowing. And we try to form statements in our minds. We try to say things to make people think we know. I think that's what Peter was trying to do. Peter was rushing to the Lord, probably trying to cover whatever indecision he had. No doubt trying to maybe, he didn't want Jesus to think he was incapable of something. But Jesus right away points to him and says, I know you're wrestling with this. I know you acted quickly because you were afraid. Maybe you really don't know the answer to this question. Maybe you were afraid to say, I don't pay the temple tax. In fact, I think he knows he was afraid to say he didn't pay the temple tax. Because Jesus corrects him and says, guess what, Peter? I don't have to pay the temple tax. But because you kind of put yourself in a bind, I'm going to cover you. I love that. Well, now they're expecting us to, right? You kind of said it. You kind of put your foot in your mouth. And Jesus says, well, so that we don't offend them, I'm going to cover you. I've already got it covered, Peter. He was afraid and no doubt struggling. What do? I just said something. I don't know if it's right or not. And I don't know what this implicates about Jesus. My attempt was for good. I wanted to make him look good in their light. And Jesus says, well, actually, you answered incorrectly. Isn't it interesting? But what I love about this is that Jesus shows not only did he know Peter would struggle with this, he knew all the pressure would be put upon him and it would act quickly. But something about this reveals Jesus knew somewhere along the way there was some guy who had a coin. Now, I say some guy. Jesus knew his name. And Jesus knew how he earned that coin. Jesus knew what kind of work he had done to get that coin. And he knew where exactly he was in a body of water one day. And he knew that somehow maybe the boat rocked, or maybe he slipped and fell. Maybe he flipped a coin to see who was going to go fishing for. I don't know what the case was, but some guy lost a coin, right? And Jesus knew all about it. And Jesus knew where exactly it rested down in the water. And he knew that there was a fish that was swimming along the water and either caught a glimmer of that coin or found it deep on the bottom and scooped it up. And he knew it was in its mouth. Don't you take comfort from that? That's what he's trying to help Peter understand. Peter, Stop worrying so much. I know you're probably pretty stressed out about what I gotta go explain myself to Jesus. I gotta get this straightened out. Peter, it's already taken care of. In fact, that's what the psalmist helps us understand, why we can take comfort in the things that God already understands about ourselves. We need to accept that, so we take the next step, which is let ourselves be vulnerable. Give ourselves completely to the Lord, because He wants to direct our lives, and only He can, because He knows the answers. He knows our fears. He knows our questions. He knows our struggles. He knows our sin. He knows what we're incapable of. He already knows these things. We don't need to put on a show. We don't need to try to impress Him or anybody else. What He wants to help us understand is, I have the answers. And I want to give you those answers, and I want to help you in such intricate details that I want to provide for you. But go to Psalm, we're already in Psalm 139, but go to verse 17. The psalmist, when he wrestles with this fact, he understands so much about me. Well, what does that imply? Verse 17, how precious also are your thoughts to me. He already knows my thoughts, and guess what I've learned? My thoughts are insignificant. My thoughts are mundane. Even with the great thoughts I have, well, they can't really solve all the problems I have, right? We sometimes think we can. If I think through this hard enough, I can figure this out, I can get through this. Jesus sees right through us. Peter couldn't fix this problem on his own. He needed Jesus to help him. And He fixes it in a way that only Jesus can. And that's what He means here in verse 17 when He says, how precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I should count them, they would outnumber the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. In other words, the thoughts of God far outweigh and far outnumber our own individual thoughts, because His thoughts have substance. His thoughts have reaction. His thoughts have results. His thoughts and His plans lead to things. Ours, vain, futile, weak. We think we can handle things on our own, right? Peter, I can answer this. What did I just do? What did I just say? Jesus, I love. Don't worry, there's a guy who lost a coin. We're going to pay it with that. You just put a coin, put your hook in the water, pull at that fish. But before we get there, I just want to ask you a question. I want to help you. And that's the next point I want to get to, is the conversation Jesus has. But before we even get to that, just a couple of the passages that support this. Turn to Matthew chapter 21. Jesus did this on so many occasions, giving us confidence that we don't have to put so much stock in our thoughts, in our planning, or our ability. God wants us to give ourselves completely to Him, to be vulnerable, to be exposed, to rely on Him, because He wants to lead us. In Matthew chapter 21, listen to what He says in Matthew chapter 21, verse 1. He says, when they had approached Jerusalem and had come to Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied there, and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, the Lord has need of them, and immediately He will send them. And notice verse 4 says, this took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. And verse 6, the disciples went and did just as Jesus had instructed them, and brought the donkey and the colt, and laid their coats on them, and He sat on the coats. Everything that He said would happen, happened. In Mark chapter 14 and verse 13, Mark chapter 14, and again, these seem to be so insignificant, don't they? Especially this one. Where are we going to have observe the Passover? Where are we going to do this? Jesus already has it covered. Mark chapter 14, verse 13. Back to verse 12. On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed, His disciples said to Him, where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover? Now listen to this request. This is not, will you raise my dead child? This is not, will you help my blind father see? This is, where are we going to go? Where are we supposed to do this? Jesus does not dismiss that. Jesus, will you figure that out? Do I have to do everything? Oh, yes, he wants to do everything. So much so he has everything already planned out. We just simply need to trust him and give ourselves to him and let him lead us. That's what he says. He says, well, here, he says, in verse 13, he said to his disciples, said, go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, the teacher says, where is my guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he himself will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready. Prepare for us there. Verse 16 says, the disciples went out and came to the city and found it just as he had told them. And I sometimes do, I just kind of do one. I was like, Daniel, why don't I take advantage of it? I don't realize he's not going to miraculously reveal these things as he did the disciples there. How few times I don't take advantage of, Lord, show me, guide me, help me, lead me. Where, how, what, who, all those questions we ask, right? Jesus has an answer. Jesus has the answer. And something else he shows them, why we should trust him with these answers is because the kind of answers he wants to give to us. In Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11, what kind of answers does he want to give to? Well, in Jeremiah 29:11, it's a great verse, says, I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. The next thing that Jesus says to Peter is really astounding. Because Jesus revealing to Peter, the reason I know your thoughts, the reason I'm able to already precede you from speaking, I already know what you're thinking, I already know what you're afraid of, I already know the mess you just stepped into, was to give Peter confidence. Remember, I'm not like other people. I'm greater than this temple you're worried about. I'm greater than the temple tax you're concerned with. And maybe that ought to then reveal to us a greater sense of confidence. Jesus is not only going to take care of the mundane things of life, because he has bigger plans for us that he's also taking care of. Why would he not also take care of the mundane if he has big plans that he's working out for us? That seems to be the point he's making to Peter. A bigger point. Let's go back there and look at it in Matthew chapter 17. The way that he answers the statement is to reveal to Peter, I want to give you so much confidence. You not only have to worry about where am I going to get this temple tax, you don't have to worry about who am I? Who is Peter? What is my life all about? Why am I here? What is God doing with me? All these bigger issues that he's going to reveal to Peter, I'm also working those things out as well. If you'll just trust me. And should give you a confidence that even the mundane things, the lesser things of this life, surely I'm on top of. But notice what he says in Matthew chapter 17 there. In verse 24, when they came to Capernaum, those who collected the 2 drachma tax came to Peter and said, does your teacher not pay the 2 drachma tax? He said, yes. And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, what do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect customs or poll tax? From their sons or from strangers? When Peter said from strangers, Jesus said to him, then the sons are exempt. In other words, I'm the whole reason for all of this religious structure. I'm the purpose. Something bigger is happening amongst us, Peter, and I want you to recognize the significance of that. And what I love about this, Jesus says, I am bigger than this. I am exempt, actually, from paying taxes about the temple because I am the temple. In fact, that's what Jesus said over in Matthew chapter 12, verse 6. I say to you, something greater than the temple is here. And did you notice how Jesus includes Peter with that? He says, so I'm going to cover both for me and you. Verse 26, when Peter said from strangers, Jesus said to him, then the sons are exempt. However, so that we do not offend them, go to the sea and throw in a hook and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for you and me. One of the great reasons, I believe, what Jesus is instructing Peter, why we should be able to trust Jesus with the mundane, with the little, with the everyday things of life, is because, to use a pun, Jesus has bigger fish to fry than the fish with the coin tax in it, right? He solves that problem, but in such a miraculous big way to show, Peter, I have bigger stuff that I have planned for you, that I'm already working with you. This is something I think sometimes we tend to sometimes, even as Christians, we get so wrapped up in the everyday things of life, and we include God in that, and we ask God for his help, and we wonder, is God going to be there or not, and how is he going to resolve this and that, and that's all good, and we need to rely on him for that, but sometimes we get so wrapped up in those things that we sometimes miss a bigger picture of what Jesus wants to include. He says, I want you to realize how big I am, Peter. I'm bigger than this temple. I am the temple. And you are a part of this. Don't lose your focus, Peter, on the bigger things of what I'm enabling you to be a part of. In Romans chapter 8, verse 31 through 33. This is what Paul says. He says, if God is for us, who is against us? He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him over for us all, how will he not also with him freely give us all things? Who will bring a charge against God's elect? What is truly beautiful about this is as Jesus reveals the true nature, the enormity of who Jesus is. And then helping Peter recognize, do you realize the closeness and the proximity you are with me and the blessings that I'm now bringing upon you because of your relationship with me? Peter, not only am I going ahead and I'm on top of the temple tax, okay? And that issue, that blunder you stepped in. But Peter, do you realize the things that I'm already working for you? And in the book of John, Jesus said, I've already prepared a place for you. He's thinking big, long term. Much bigger and more significant than the things. What do you mean? Is Jesus going to provide a place for me here? Yes. Yeah, he's not going to let us go without. Sometimes we get so even caught up in some of those things, we forget the bigger picture. He has plans for eternal dwelling places that he's already prepared and put. And there's something that we will be doing while we're in those dwelling places. What are we going to be doing? 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12 says, we will be reigning with him. If we endure, we will also reign with him. Wow. That seems so much more significant and bigger than, do I have money to pay the taxes this April? Seems a little bit more big and significant than, how am I going to get through the month? Jesus not only is telling us, I'm already on top of all those mundane things, but there are bigger, and I need you to trust me with that so you can trust me even with the bigger things, that we need to put our whole lives and invest in those things and to live in hope to receive them. Romans 5:17 says, those who receive the abundance of grace and of the gift of righteousness will reign in life through the one, Jesus Christ. And in Revelation 3:21 says, he who overcomes, I will grant to him to sit down with me on my throne. I want to look at two passages very quickly before we bring our final point and bring this lesson to a close. But turn over to Psalm 8. We're going to look very quickly at the 3 verses of Psalm 8. Psalm 8 gives a very beautiful depiction of what God's intentions for humanity really was and is. And it's very big. God has humongous plans and expectations for humanity and why he's placed us here. In Psalm 8, verse 1, he says, O Lord our God, how majestic is your name in all the earth, who have displayed your splendor above the heavens. From the mouth of infants and nursing babes, you have established strength because of your adversaries, to make the enemy and the revengeful cease. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you take thought of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than God, and you crown him with glory and majesty. You make him to rule over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes through the paths of the seas. God has displayed his majesty and empowered mankind to be the image of God on this earth, demonstrating that kind of rule and dominance. But something happened. Something interrupted those intentions. Hebrews 2 deals with that. Turn to Hebrews chapter 2, because he picks up with the fulfillment of where Psalm 8 leaves off. Hebrews chapter 2. And in a comical way, the writer of Hebrews apparently was not good at memorizing, because he doesn't quote Psalm. He just says, well, somewhere it says. I always love that. Well, we know it's Psalm 8. We'll help you out, writer of Hebrews. Psalm 8. But notice what he says there in Hebrews chapter 2. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 5. For he did not subject to angels the world to come, concerning which we are speaking, but one has testified somewhere, Psalm 8, try, saying, what is man that you are concerned about him? You have made him for a little while lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, and have appointed him over the works of your hands. You have put all things in subjection under his feet. For in subjecting all things to him, he left nothing that is not subject to him. Now this him is still dealing with humanity. That's the subject of Psalm 8. But notice the problem. But now we do not yet see all things subjected to him. It doesn't seem that way sometimes, does it? Because someone came in the form of flesh who seemed to be able to do things we human beings can't do. Like calm the sea. Like put a hook in the water and say, I'm going to tell you what kind of fish I'm going to pull up. Creation does not seem to be totally subjected to us, does it? It seems like we're almost in subjection to the creation. Jesus has come to do some, verse 9, but we do see him who was made for a little while lower than the angels, namely Jesus, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. For it was fitting for him, for whom are all things, and through whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to perfect the author of their salvation through sufferings. For both he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified are all from one Father. Just as the key thing is that we ought to be the rulers and the dominions, yet death, because of sin, has now bring us into subjection. Jesus, then who's perfect, subjected himself to death. He tasted death. He became like us so that he might what? Bring us to the glory of the Father that he enjoys. And that's what he's saying to Peter. Peter, I want you to realize the things I'm working, the things I'm accomplishing for us. Big things. I'm talking about reigning with me in heaven. I'm talking about having dominion, sharing that with you. These things that you in your feeble state, because sin has weakened and brought this to creation, and brought this to your state of mind, and death and sickness has corrupted you. Jesus has plans for us, yes, but sometimes we miss the point. He is going to reinstate and restore what God always intended for mankind. To have that dominion. Jesus says we will have that with him. That's what he's restoring. New heavens, new earth. We will judge angels. Paul says in 1 Corinthians. That sounds to me a little bit bigger. And can I pay the temple tax? That's why he does it the way he does it. But does he, well, Peter, don't worry, I got a coin right here. Let me show you how I'm going to get that coin. And you go ahead and you say, that's for me and you. I got us covered. We have bigger fish to fry, Peter, than this temple business. All these things were temporary. All these things were there to bring about the purpose of Christ and what He is going to redeem and what He's going to bring for us. But with that, Jesus, who is greater than the temple, who wants to bring that greatness to us and have us share in that with Him on His throne, I said I'm humbled by that thought. We'll be with Him on His throne. Those who overcome will be granted that blessing. You know what's great about Jesus? Specific here, someone with all that power, with all that glory, with all that authority, is still humble. Because Jesus shows He also is sensitive to the stumbling blocks of others. Peter, I don't want to be a stumbling block to, even though we don't have to pay this tax. I'm exempt. But you've already kind of implemented me in this. And Jesus had ever say, I know this is what Peter said, but let me set you straight. I don't have to. Could have done that. I love how humble. It's almost as if to say, isn't there a greater strength in showing how low you can go, how accommodating you can be, how peaceful you can be. And Jesus shows the true beauty. There's beauty in greatness. Not raw dominance and force. That's actually weak. True greatness is humble service, accommodation, peacefulness, being the peacemaker. So we do not offend them. Take that and give it to them for you and me. And also truly shows the great reward for those who follow Him in such humble state of mind, that truly He has great plans for those who follow Him in this way, who simply give way to our own desires and our own needs and even our own abilities, and we seek to, as Jesus said, to be the peacemaker. I want to just make a reference to two of those attributes we're seeing that Jesus demonstrated, that He preached in the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, what are the bigger things that Jesus has in mind for us? What does He say? The meek shall inherit. Blessed are the meek. They shall inherit the earth. He's going to restore what God always intended. Us to be able to reign with Christ, who has that, who demonstrated that. That's worth being faithful for. That's worth living for. Well, how do I do that? How do I serve Him? Verse 9 of Matthew 5. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. It's because we have the right and the ability. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to exert it with such force and dominance and, well, I'm entitled to it. There can be peace, there can be gentleness, there can be an acquiescence of bringing people to understanding where we're coming from. Paul demonstrated this. Paul said, I become all things to all men, so that I might win some. To the Jew, I'll think like a Jew. The Gentile, I'll come to him like a Gentile. Try to meet you halfway, so we can try to come to terms with the greater principles of what God wants for us. So what a great demonstration Jesus shows. One, God, Jesus, He knows everything about us, so why be at a distance? Why hide? Why pretend like I'm going to reserve this aspect of my life just for me? God already knows it. And hopefully by breaking that barrier down, you will be comforted to know that He wants you to draw close to Him so He can direct you, because He has splendid answers. He has such detailed ways of working things out, and He has very detailed, specific ways He's working our own future out. We can trust Him. We can follow Him. And thirdly, Jesus truly is greater than the temple, but yet truly mindful and meek and lowly, and concerned and considerate about the weaknesses and the issues that others sometimes have. And so we want to simply invite anyone who's with us who's never obeyed the gospel to consider this. Peter, I don't know if Peter didn't have the money or just Jesus said, well, here, I'm going to pay the money this way. But whatever the case is, Jesus covered the cost. I can't help but think maybe this was a foreshadowing of a greater cost that Jesus was also going to cover for Peter, and then he's covered for all of us. Showing again, just as Jesus is willing to cover a temple tax, surely he's willing to cover the payment due for our sin. You can't pay it. Blood is required. Our blood is useless because it's covered with sin. Had to be the unblemished blood of a spotless lamb, and Jesus was that perfect sacrifice, and he paid it, covered it for us in such miraculous ways. In fact, in just the same way where Jesus said, you're going to put in a hook, and you're going to draw out the first fish, it's going to have a coin in your mouth. Jesus also paid his blood much the same way. The prophets already said, well, there's going to be a child born of a virgin. I'm going to name the town Bethlehem. And there are going to be individuals who are going to rage and they're going to cry out, you saved yourself. Why don't you bring yourself down from the cross? And they're going to cast lots for his even garments, and they're going to strip him naked and bare. And when they pierce him, all men will look at him. And they will pierce him with the sword, but none of his bones will be broken. In just the same way Jesus predicted the way that the temple tax would be paid, God had long ago predicted all the various ways that the blood of Jesus would be paid for sinners. Already had it orchestrated, already had it designed. So we can take great comfort. Jesus has plans for us, and he already has designs for us as we follow him. Won't you put your faith and your confidence in him? Won't you put your faith in the Lord and come and confess that he is the Father, or that he is the Son of the Father, he is the Savior, and through your confession that Jesus is the Christ, repenting of sin, to be baptized in water for forgiveness of sin, and to walk in newness of life. I encourage you to do that while we stand and sing this psalm of encouragement together.